Okay, welcome everybody. Hello, hello. We're going to kick things off here with some announcements. First off, I'd like to ask you if you would please turn your cell phones on quiet, or better yet, turn them off. Or if you've got a hammer, you could smash them, whatever it takes. That was a political joke that I think went over everybody's head. I don't deal in politics. All right, my name is Mike McMullin. I'm president of the Chamber, and I'm going to introduce you to the MC of the day, and that is our chairman of the board for the Chamber this year, Mr. Dennis Twigg, from Hoffman, Comfort, Offutt, Scott, and Halstead, LLP, one of the greatest names I've ever heard in my life. Give him a round of applause.
I only had to give him my business card to make sure he remembered who I was and what my firm's name was. So anyway, we're off to a good start. So my name is Dennis Twigg, like Mike said, and I'm happy to be serving as the chair of the board in 2020. Like Mike said, but it bears repeating, silence your cell phones. We are being recorded. You don't want to be the person whose cell phone is on the recording. Thank you for coming today, and I trust you're enjoying your lunch. Today is our annual Carroll County Budget Luncheon, and you'll be hearing shortly from Mr. Ted Zaleski, the Director of Management. Getting a little feedback for Carroll County. Ted has been graciously providing information and insights into the county budget to the Chamber members for years, and we hope to look forward to see what he has to share. I want to thank the Community Media Center. They're filming today's event, and we'll be posting it on their website, and I think it's being live streamed right now. It'll be broadcast later on Channel 19 as well. So first, allow me to introduce our two sponsors who will be speaking during this program in a little bit. Please stand and be recognized. We've got Sherry Bullen of Brown, Schultz, Sheridan, and Fritz, certified public accountants. Thank you very much. I think their pens are on the table too. They write very well. I've already used them. And Dave Peloquin, president of Main Street Advisors, a Carroll County Chamber member for over 20 years. Thank you to both of you. Today wouldn't be possible without your generous support. Now I'd like to also recognize the elected officials we have today. We have a number of commissioners in the room, Mr. Dick Weaver, Ed Rothstein, and Ed Boucher. Stand and be recognized. Thank you. I don't think any of the other commissioners I missed? I don't think so. Carroll County State's Attorney Brian Leonardo. Judge Richard Titus. Superintendent of Schools Stephen Lockard. And from the Board of Education, we have Martha Herbert, Patricia Dorsey, Kenneth Kyler, Tara Battaglia. Thank you to all of you. And of Westminster City Council, we've got Ann Gilbert and Ben Yingling. Thank you both for being here. Did I miss anybody? All right, if I did miss you, you're not speaking up, so that counts missing you. I'd also like to recognize Dr. James Ball, president of the college. Thank you for coming. And a number of past chairs of the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. Dave Bollinger, Steve Aquino, Steve Wance, one good Steve deserves another, Suzette Colvat, and the only person mentioned twice, Ben Yingling. Today's first sponsor from Brown, Schultz, Sheridan, Fritz is Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors is Sherry Cracium Bolin. Sherry, come on up.
Thanks, Dennis. So some of you may have noticed the new name. If you recognize that I have always been with first Regular Lehman and Hauk, and then we changed our name a few years ago to RLH CPAs and Business Advisors. And then in June of this year, we did merge in with Brown, Schultz, Sheridan, and Fritz. We still are on Main Street in Westminster and also in Frederick, Maryland, and Hanover, Pennsylvania. And then we now have offices in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So just a little bit bigger, but we are also the same. I'm still a partner with the firm, and Wanda Lynn is still a principal here in our Westminster office, and she's here today, as well as Tom Hauk from our Frederick office, And Randy Fackler, our Director of Tax from Camp Hill, and Scott Ensworthy, one of the principals from our Camp Hill office, are also with us today. This is kind of weird like that. I usually go over just one or two little tidbits from the tax law and give you a little bit of idea what's going on. I don't know if anybody heard, last December 22nd, Congress decided to give us a little Christmas gift in that Secure Act that they passed at the end of the year. They made a couple of the things that we liked in the old tax law that kind of went away in the new tax law last year. Retroactively, they retroactively did that. Now, normally you might see them pass something in December for that year. It didn't only retroactively go back to effective in 2019. These things are actually re-effective for 2018. So there are a few things, for those of you that weren't aware, that they changed the tax law at the end of December of 19 that actually impact your 2018 tax returns. So there are some amendments, if it benefits you, that you may want to take a look at. A couple of the little things, like if you had a personal residence debt forgiveness, something like that, during the downturn of the economy, those things were made tax-free, where you didn't have to pay any gains on that. That had gone out of the tax law in 2018. So now they retroactively reinstated that. So if somebody you know or you have something like that going on, make sure they take a look at it. There are a couple of things like the new home energy efficiency credit for home builders. So if somebody you know or somebody in the room builds new homes, that's something to take a look at. There's a couple of things. Most of them wouldn't impact somebody enough that they'd want to amend a 2018 return, but definitely if you have something big, it could be something to look at. Really, I think state and local taxes sometimes kind of get us down a little bit more than the federal. Sorry, Ted. But a couple of things on that front that has been going on. So one of the things in the new tax law as well was our $10,000 cap on the state and local tax deduction and your itemized deductions if you still do itemize. A lot of people no longer can itemize because of the $10,000 cap. And in Maryland, of course, we were one of the states with a little bit higher state tax rate. So that impacted a lot of our clients and a lot of people probably in this room last year. Just to let you know, some of the states are involved in some lawsuits with the federal government over that, and some workarounds have been coming about. The IRS was pretty quick to put out regulations that squashed a lot of the workarounds that we had going on. Maryland is involved in an appeal right now with 3 other states actually suing the federal government for that limitation. So keep an eye on that. They just appealed in November. After losing the first part. One of the more interesting workarounds possible for partnerships and pass-through entities like S corporations that some of the states are working on that the IRS hasn't opined on yet would be the potential for taking some state and local income tax on your business return, which at that point, normally those entities pay at the individual level. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on and maybe talk to some of our Maryland representatives about, because that seems to be something that could work in the realm of things. The contributions, those aren't working out. Charitable contributions, they aren't letting you do that, take a credit for that. They already squashed that idea. But that's one that maybe 4 or 5 states are looking at, and I think that could be a possibility. So keep an eye out there for that. There are some things that the states are working on to try and get around some of that for us. Depending. All right.
Thank you again for the very succinct seminar and the sponsorship. Next, we have Dave Peloquin, President of Main Street Advisors, LLC. Thank you, Dave.
Good to see everybody again. It's always a pleasure coming to listen to Ted fill us in on everything we sometimes don't want to know about what to expect in coming months and years. Main Street Advisors has been in Main Street, Westminster now since 1999. We are a 100% fee-only registered investment advisor, and that just means all of our revenues come directly from our clients. We take fiduciary status. I want to introduce my operations manager, Ann Mondor, as well as Melissa Jordan, who's our Director of Community Development and Marketing. Couple of quick things would just be to keep in mind for those of you who are doing financial planning, and hopefully everybody in here is, that the required minimum distribution age was increased to 72. So that might have impact on some people, as well as the fact that stretch IRAs, which were the ability for spouses, excuse me, and children to be able to inherit an IRA and restart the age at their current life expectancy, have been reduced pretty significantly. So those are just a couple of things. If you haven't talked to your CPA, your financial planner, your investment advisor, might want to run that by them and just see if it affects you. I'm not going to keep you any longer because I know we're all really here to listen to Ted. I'd ask you to look for us on social media as well as our website, which is we've just revamped, and it's Main Street Advisors, street abbreviated, so MAINST advisors.com. Again, thanks very much, and hope you have a great year.
Thank you to Dave, and thank you to both our sponsors for their continued support of the Chamber. If anyone is interested in sponsoring an upcoming Chamber event, please see Mike McMullin before leaving today. That's him. As there are a few sponsorship opportunities remaining in 2020. Now, without further ado, let's begin our main program. I'm sure most of you know Ted Zaleski as Carroll County's Director of Management and Budget. Ted has been with the county for over 25 years, 19 years as the Director of Management and Budget. He's the president of the Maryland Association of County Budgets and Finance Affiliate since it began a decade ago. He's the past president of the Maryland Government Finance Officers Association. He's served on the Government Finance Officers Association Budgeting and Fiscal Policy Committee. He served on Towson University School of Business and Economics Advisory Committee. He's an adjunct instructor at McDaniel College, and he helped develop a new public administration policy graduate program at McDaniel College. Ted lives in Carroll County, just outside Westminster. Today, Ted will talk about the issues involved in county's fiscal budget for 2020 and beyond, and then he'll take questions. We're going to have the Q&A afterwards. We will have a microphone run out to whoever's asking those questions. In the back, they're gesturing with their microphone. So if you're going to ask, just wait for the microphone to come to you so we can be cognizant of the people watching at home. Please welcome Ted Zaleski.
Just want to be clear, I am not responsible for taxes. A couple of years ago, Commissioner Wance didn't come, and I told you all that he had sent me a message saying he had an invitation to some winery. And I said, well, Ted, wine, probably made the right choice. He's not here again today, but he's at the Governor's Emergency Management Advisory Council. Now, I hear that, and I have to think he's just trying to avoid me. I think it was the same year, Jason Stamball was the board chair, and he was talking, he said, the branding for this event is terrible. The Carroll County Budget Luncheon. He said it's horrible. So I've been thinking about it. And I've got an idea. And unfortunately, I'm not a fan of this setup, so this is going to be tough for you guys probably. But what about TED Talks? I went on the website to look at this for some reason, and I saw sponsor Brown, Schultz, Sheridan, and Fritz, and I sent a email to Mike saying, so what, did Regular Layman and Houck drop me? Mike said, no, never. So as you heard, latest incarnation of our old friends, Regular Layman and Houck. And I just wanted to make sure that, there's a rumor out there, and I just wanted to make sure it didn't go any further. This merger did not happen so that they could sponsor this event. All right. One other thought before we get into stuff. This kind of snuck up on me this year. I'm usually starting to think about what I'm going to talk about a little bit earlier than I did. And I said something to my wife about it, and she said, well, can't you just do the same presentation? And I said, well, maybe I could. Not that I would, but maybe I could. But then yesterday I was working on this a little bit, and I had music on, and Led Zeppelin song, the song Remains the Same was playing. And I said, hey, Led Zeppelin, maybe they're talking to me, just do the same presentation. But I got thinking about, as the people I'm working with seem to keep getting younger and younger, My cultural references often fall flat. You guys mostly got Led Zeppelin, but I might say something about a Mary Tyler Moore show or George Carlin or Fleetwood Mac, and then I look at them and say, "You don't know what I'm talking about, do you?" And I get a, "Okay, boomer." All right. First, a piece of, I think, good news. Carroll County's long had a goal of putting 100,000 acres of ag land into permanent easements. We are closing in on 75,000 acres. And in October, there's actually going to be a celebration at the Farm Museum, celebration of what we've done and also looking forward to what's yet to do. Not going to talk a lot about this, but you heard it from me before. You probably have heard some out and around. But we are beginning a transition from a all-volunteer fire rescue EMS force to what we call a combination force, where volunteers will be working collaboratively with a paid career force. Carroll County has been very fortunate for a long, long time to be served by a volunteer force. The world is changing around us, though, and it's no longer viable for the long term, which actually led volunteers to come to the commissioners saying, we need to do something to ensure we can keep providing services. So I'm just going to mention that, that's happening. We're actively working toward what is this going to look like, and we're in the process right now of hiring the first director of what will be that new combination force. Okay, talk a little bit about county revenue, the results of those taxes that I'm not responsible for. Property tax, our biggest revenue. The last assessment was Hampstead, Manchester, northeast part of the county. Average reassessment of 6.2%. We actually had projected 6.25%. Don't take that as some brilliant work on our part. We were okay with our estimate, but I never really expected to come that close. But one interesting thing, at least to people like me, the average residential assessment was 6.3% and commercial was 4.7%. Best I can recall, we've never had that happen before where the commercial assessment was lower than the residential. And I don't know what it means. It must mean something, but I don't know what to do with that. But as we look down the road, remember, this is well more than half of our revenue. We still, as you blend in what's happened for each of the three groups as they're reassessed, we still are only looking at growth around 3% a year. And this is, we're talking about fiscal year 26 we're planning for now. So it's good that we have the growth, but when people start thinking about all the things that they would like to see happen, all the pressures to provide services and facilities and infrastructure, the one thing we know is 3% growth doesn't get us anywhere near doing the things people would like to see done. Our second biggest revenue, income tax. We've talked a little bit about this in recent years. You heard some mention of the federal income tax changes. We've known this was going to impact us. It was hard to know how. Things are further complicated in that people who have the ability to make choices about how they're going to do their taxes, where they can say, I want to recognize this income in this year or that year. We saw people moving money from 17 into 18 and then 18 into 19. So even if we could figure out what's happening underneath of it all, which we can't, we don't have enough information, we've got this other layer of uncertainty about not just what was happening, but how did people mess up looking at what was happening by making other choices. For a long time, people were asking, okay, well, you should be getting more income tax, right? And conceptually, we were saying, yes, we should. The problem was, in our actual revenues, we weren't seeing it. So I didn't have any argument why people who thought there ought to be an increase were wrong, but I wasn't seeing it. At the end of last fiscal year, we saw a sudden jump in income tax. And when I say sudden, a few months from the end of the year, we were actually concerned that we weren't going to make our income tax budget. We thought we were going to be too low. And then we ended up being several $1 million above. So it was a sudden spurt. And that carried into the first distribution that we have gotten this year. And those of you who have come to this before, might remember, we get our income tax money in 4 big receipts over the year. We've seen one so far. We'll see the next one in a week or so. But even at that, we'll only see 50% of the total revenue before we actually adopt our budget. So this is always a problem for us. But right now, having gotten that first quarter of what we're going to get, we're $3.7 million above what we budgeted. So that's good news. Clearly, we'd rather have that than $3.7 million less than we budgeted. But we're not sure what to do with this yet. And there's a lot of thinking that because of that taxpayer behavior, that in our fiscal year, we're kind of seeing the benefit from 2 different tax years happening now. Now, if that's true, and I tend to think it is, we have to be very careful because you can't just assume all that's going to continue into the future, or you're going to be making decisions based on money that's not going to be there. So just this morning, I was talking a little bit about this with the commissioners, and one of the things I want them to think about and everybody else to think about is to not get too carried away with how good this news is. It's good, but how good is it? We don't want to do too much. We have a couple revenues that are pulling us back in the other direction, unfortunately. One is our investment income. And this time last year, the Fed had begun raising rates and were projecting to continue raising rates into the future. And we built our plans on that idea. And then it seems like we adopted the budget, and the next day they started decreasing rates. So not only did we not get the increases they were planning on, but we were starting to go the other way. So this really hurt us in our plans. And the other one was more of a self-inflicted wound. There was legislation passed in Annapolis last year that changed how 911 fees are applied to your devices. Maryland was the only state, I believe this is true, the only state in the country that applied the 911 fee per bill instead of per device. So it didn't matter if you had 1 phone or 6 phones, you paid the same thing. So they changed that last year so that it now applies per device. Now, when we were trying to figure out what to do with this, the problem is there's no information available. The phone companies don't share how many devices are out there. So we had to play a bit of a guessing game. And we debated this for a long time, and we got to a point where we said, it doesn't seem unreasonable to think that there's, on average, 2.5 devices per phone bill. And we thought it might actually be more than that. We got our first distribution of this money, and unfortunately, it didn't match up to what we thought was reasonable. The implications of the money we actually got would be about 1.6 devices per phone bill, which doesn't feel right to me, but I guess maybe there's more people out there who they have 1 phone, one bill than we were thinking. And it is easy to get carried away sometimes. You know a bunch of people who all have 4, and you kind of that lead you to think, well, that's where everybody is. So we're going to be waiting to see some more of the actual collections, but again, that one hurt us. Then, as we're planning for the future, we're well past the really bad news that we went through 5-10 years ago. And we've kind of settled into this modest level of growth. And I don't see anything that changes that. I mean, there's a lot that would lead us to hope that we see some greater growth in revenue, because there's a lot of arguably unmet needs, and even more than that, things that people would like to see us doing. And the commissioners, every year have to wrestle with, well, I've got good arguments to do this and this and this. How much can we do, Ted? Well, you can pick one of those. And you have good arguments for all of them. So how do you end up making those choices? What gets done and what doesn't get done? Now I'll move on to the state budget for a little bit. course, this is always the timing of this event in the state budget. We're in a period where we know some things, but a lot is still unsettled. Just share a few things with you. The governor's budget, when he proposed it this year, came with what they call a BRFA, Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. Basically, this is a list of legislation that is necessary to make that budget actually work. Which means if it doesn't get all that legislation, then the proposed balanced budget isn't actually a balanced budget. And the BRFA this year is significant. It would require changes in existing legislation to make $530 million of legislated expenditures go away. So that's big. And on top of that, he needs legislation to create $157 million of revenue that doesn't exist now. So he's counting on $700 million of changes in current legislation to make the budget work. And then, governors' budgets tend to be sales brochures of a sort. And this isn't about Governor Hogan. It's about every governor that I've experienced. They tell you the things they want you to hear. They leave out some things that might be inconvenient to hear. Present things one way over here and one way over there, depending on the argument that they want to make. Like one interesting one this year, there's existing legislation that would make a 4% increase in state funding to our DDA providers, ARC Target Change, Flying Colors of Success. And the governor included 2% increase in his budget. But if you look at the budget, it says 2% increase in funding, but doesn't say anything about 4% is already in legislation. So trying to make a positive out of what's actually a negative to those agencies. The governor's budget would slow the legislated repayment of program open space. This is a state shared revenue that is our primary means of funding our park capital projects. And the state has been diverting the local share of this to state functions for years. But there's some legislation that exists right now that is supposed to pay us back some of what didn't come. The governor's budget would slow down that repayment. The community college is an interesting one. The governor's budget would slow down planned legislated increases, but even beyond that, for many years, there's been a thing called the CADE formula, which ties community college funding to the University of Maryland system funding. The governor's actually proposing, let's get rid of that idea, and then wants to limit increases to the projected increase in the state's revenue minus something. So the college would never grow, would always grow slower than state revenue, and would no longer be tied in any way to funding for other higher education. One that affects the county directly, and for those of you who have been here before, you might remember my little rant about State Department assessments and taxation. Counties pay 50% of the cost of a state agency with state employees doing state work. We have absolutely nothing to do with what they do except we get to write them a check for half of the cost. The governor has proposed making that 60% of the cost. For the county, that would be an increase of more than $100,000 of spending on our part. And when we talk about these things, the really important thing to me to remember is when the state does this, what they are doing is making a choice to spend locally generated revenue and taking that choice out of the hands of the commissioners. Whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, you're still left with that. Somebody in Annapolis is making this choice. Another one that looks like it's going to be important to us, we're starting a major extension of our airport runway. This is going to be a project that's going to go 10 years, 15 years, I don't know. But the model for funding projects like this has been 90% Federal Aviation Administration, 5% Maryland Aviation Administration, and then 5% local money. The governor's budget and plan would reduce Maryland Aviation Administration funding from $311 million in fiscal year 21 to $24 million in fiscal year 25. it seems hard to imagine that the MAA 5% of this project, which is about a $70 million project, is going to be there. I don't see any reason to think that the FAA is just going to come up with more money. So that means locally we would have to find more money than we thought we would when we began planning this project. Now, the governor likes to call his budget 100% structurally balanced. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he means when he says that. Now, the budget that he's proposing has to be balanced. I mean, that's just basic. That's the law. You know, you need to do a balanced budget. Although remember, he needs a lot of legislation for this to actually be a balanced budget. But then the state plans 4 more years beyond that. Now, to say structurally balanced, in my mind, would imply you're looking into the future and saying revenues and expenditures match up. But if you look at that next 4 years for the state, in fiscal year 25, what is being proposed is $1.1 billion of expenditures more than they are projecting revenues. You know, so the budget is saying we're taking on expenditures that are going to go on into the future, but we don't actually know how we're going to pay for that. So this next budget will be balanced, but it leaves a big question mark: what happens after that? And the next budget will be balanced, so they will always figure out the next budget. But it would seem like a stronger position to be in to say, we've made these expenditure choices, and based on the assumptions we're making today, we believe there will be enough revenue to cover those expenditures. School construction, state school construction funding is also some interesting things going on. In part of the budget, there's about $300 million for school construction, which is more or less in line with where we've been in recent years. But there's a new proposal that would create a parallel process. So there's a school construction process over here for dividing up the money, approving the projects, making all that happen. The governor is proposing setting up a second process run by the Maryland Stadium Authority to get some more schools done. And this is going to be funded with what they call revenue bonds. So we're going to be issuing debt that's backed by a stream of revenue, and that stream of revenue is casino funding. Now, what's being proposed is $400 million of bonds in fiscal year 21, $2.2 billion over 5 years. Now, I'm a little interested in the thinking behind having 2 separate school construction processes. But beyond that, there's something that bothered me as soon as I heard this. More than $2 billion of debt backed by casino revenue. What happens if casino revenue isn't what they expect it to be, or is for a while and then begins to decline? They still have to pay the debt. You know, they can't say, oh, sorry, the casino money dried up, so our bad, you know. And connected to school construction is another interesting little thing. You know, Carroll County is in an unusual sort of situation. We're not one of the big counties, but we're not really one of the little counties either. And there's actually 2 lists in some of these things that are happening. One is in connection with this additional state funding for school construction. And there's a list of the big counties with specific dollar amounts. You know, Baltimore County gets X, Anne Arundel County gets Y of this total pot. And we're not on that list. And that's where the bulk of the money is, of that $2.2 billion. I don't remember exactly, but you know, probably 1.8 of it is going to the big counties. Then there's another list. And when the states fund schools, they've got all these things. This is eligible, this isn't. They'll pay for certain things, they won't pay for certain things. But there's another list of small counties where they're saying, we're going to increase the eligibility. We didn't used to pay for that thing, but now we will. We're not on that list either. So we're not on the big list with all the big money, and we're not on the little list to get more things covered. We're just kind of hanging in between there. Makes you feel unloved. Yeah, another little rant that some of you have heard before. Maybe I'll have to do a rant-a-day calendar or something like that. Aid to local government. The state will talk about, here's how much we provide in aid to local government. 40% of the state budget goes to aid to local government. 85% of that is what's going to school systems, and some of it goes to community colleges, health departments, libraries. Less than 10% actually comes to local elected officials. That 10% this year, or less than 10%, is going up, an 8.3% increase, which will undoubtedly get talked about a lot in Annapolis. Oh, I don't know what you guys are complaining about. You got an 8% increase. That's almost all about that legislative change to 911 fees. So it's not about the state providing more funding. It's just that the law changed so we get more from our 911. Now, for the elephant in the room, or maybe the herd of elephants in the room. Kerwin Commission, the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Local Government, or now legislation blueprint for Maryland's future. This is a really big deal. And it is a big deal for providing education. I mean, the commission spent a lot more time talking about how should we provide education than they did on the what's it going to cost and how are we going to pay for it. And there's a lot of interesting things going on over there. My intent is not to talk about that part. I am talking about the how do you pay, what's it going to cost, how do you pay for it, who's going to pay for it. The General Assembly has already started funding some pieces of this, but a very small part of the big picture. Right now, the estimate for this at full implementation is $4 billion a year, $4 billion of additional funding a year, which I believe is an underestimate. And I won't get into the details, but there's things, once you start digging into it, you say, well, is that really a fair way to think about this? But let's say it's $4 billion for now. The current recommendation is for the state to pick up $2.8 billion of that and counties to pick up $1.2 billion of that. Now, even when you say that, it's not as simple as saying, okay, the state share is 2.8, because I have to ask, where's the state going to get the $2.8 billion? And if they don't have it, and I already told you they don't have it, they're 5 years out, they're more than $1 billion short of doing what they're doing today. So they don't have another 2.8 for something new. Where are they going to get that money? And we've seen this happen enough in the past that my concern is always they will look to counties and either stop sending something that they're sending now or make us pay for something that we're not paying for today. And that can happen in lots of ways. Taking away is not much about the county anymore because there's not much revenue that comes directly to the county other than the capital budget, and they can hurt us there. But there are people in this room that are very dependent on state funding. The school system, the community college. Anybody from the health department here? No? Oh, Ed Singer's going to be hearing from me now. Yeah, and I did notice a lot more Board of Education members here than community college board trustees. What was I saying? Oh, okay. People in this room are very dependent on state funding, and we are funding, the county is funding those same organizations. So if the state has to make decisions that affect them in order to balance their budget, then there's a ripple effect concern for us. If the community college can't balance their budget, they only have 3 things they can do. Talk to the state, which doesn't help because the state tells you what you're going to get, raise tuition, or talk to the commissioners. Board of Education only has 2 choices, and one of those isn't really a choice. The state tells them what they get. If they don't think that works, all they can do is talk to the commissioners. So this is a lot of money with no obvious way of paying for it. Now, there was just recently a proposal to extend sales tax to other services to raise additional money. Will that go anywhere. I have no way to know, but I'm sure they're going to be exploring those things as well as others. So on Kerwin, we talked about this last year, but just to remind you, so what's all this money going to be spent on? What are we doing with this? There's really three big things. There's a long list of things, but three what I think are big things. One is to put a floor of $60,000 on teacher salaries. So any teacher in any county, if you get hired, you're making at least $60,000. And one of the reasons I think Kerwin costs are undercounted is they haven't dealt with what happens to the people who are above that $60,000 floor. And that seems to me to be such a big concern that I don't understand how they could not have at least attempted to address it, but they didn't. But on the other side of that, and I was just thinking about this yesterday or the day before, I'm not sure what to think about this yet, but in Carroll County, the starting pay, I think, is about $48,000. The legislation that would require the $60,000 floor now phases it in through fiscal year 30. So it's not like $60,000 floor tomorrow. It's a $60,000 floor almost 10 years from now. So I said, if we're starting at $48,000, and we assume just for talking purposes a 2% COLA every year, by fiscal year 30, that would take that salary to about $58,000, which is almost to that floor. So I'm left now to wonder, and I truly am just wondering about this. I don't have anything to figure out exactly what this means yet. Does that mean we actually aren't going to need all that $4.4 billion to get there because it's just going to happen naturally? Am I missing something? So it's a really big question for me. Second piece is there's a desire to free up teacher time for teachers not to spend as much time in the classroom. Now, some people hear that and it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but there was thought behind this, and what they're shooting for is for good teachers to have more time to plan, more times to help other teachers become good teachers, and more time to be able to work directly with students who need help to stay on track. The big trick here is that in freeing up that time, you need more teachers. And in fact, they estimate about 14,000 new teachers across the state. And start doing the math, 14,000 teachers is a lot of money. And then there's also the question, can we actually find 14,000 more teachers? And I kind of wonder, Maryland is already a net importer of teachers, teaching degrees. We don't create enough in Maryland to serve Maryland. And then the last big piece is a pretty big expansion of pre-kindergarten. Then one thing that doesn't get a lot of attention here, and this might be one of those things where you're sitting out there saying, okay, Ted, did you really think this was interesting? But right now, our legal requirement to fund the school system is based on what's called maintenance of effort. We have to provide a certain number of dollars per student. If the number of students goes up, we have to add the same amount of dollars for every one of those students that went up. Now, every time the county exceeds maintenance of effort, we create a new maintenance of effort, but the same idea still applies. Our commitment is connected to the number of students. If the Kerwin recommendations all happen more or less as planned, that changes completely. And what happens now is the state is going to be determining, here's how much education costs. And then they're going to be saying, counties, here's your share of what education costs, and Carroll County, here's your share of what education costs. Now, if the state says, last year this was education, next year this is education, our share goes up with that choice that they made. It's no longer tied to a number of dollars per student. It's tied, again, to decisions that are being made in Annapolis that we will have, I'll say, little input into. So, it's hard. This is such a big change. It's hard to even think about just what is this going to feel like when we start trying to deal with it. Okay, there are lots of other things we could talk about, but Mike's already looking at his phone.
A little time for questions.
And in case you're feeling that I've been irrationally exuberant, I'm going to leave you with a down note. Though the short-term prospects seem to be diminished, a recession is in our future. We are now in the longest business expansion the United States has ever had, ever. There's no reason to think that we're never going to have a slowdown again. Now, I'm not predicting next week, next year, 2 years from now. I don't know. But I feel pretty confident that I know there will be a recession. So everything that I just said, however difficult that might be, when that time comes, your difficulties just multiplied, and we'll be forced into figuring out how do we make these things work. And again, what are the choices? We can't do it all, so what gets done and what doesn't get done. All right, I'll stop there, and we'll take questions. Remember, wait for the microphone. Have one right up here.
If you could stand up, they can stand up when they ask the question.
I just want to comment on your casino revenue. We have a new casino at MT Bank Stadium. We have one in Prince George's County. The one up at Frostburg is not doing too well. But you can't count on casino money because you're surrounded by all these states. New Jersey's Atlantic City is, I understand, is reduced in size. So that's not really a solid source of revenue, long-term revenue. So I hope they understand that.
Well, I don't know, but I agree with you. I think it's risky. If we were using casino money for school construction, and you were saying, as it becomes available, we're going to put it in school construction, that would be one thing. But to back debt with it, seems risky. I depressed you all into submission. All right, well, I guess that's it for today then. Thank you all for coming.
So, I got all kinds of things I'd like to say. It always surprises me when Ted comes to speak. Nobody really leaves here like, yeah. But we still get like over 100 people every year. You people are insane. That's all I'm going to say. And Ted, I'm having a St. Patrick's Day party. I want you to come and entertain people. I like a nice upbeat attitude. So, pretty funny. Well, no, but Ted, thank you for being here. Ted, you've been doing this forever and a day. He also gives a lot of his time to run one of the sessions of Leadership Carroll. For any of you that have been through the class, Ted does a great job. And he just does it because he loves it, He doesn't have to do Leadership Carroll. He doesn't get paid for it. I will double. No, you don't. But I will double your pay next year from 0 to 00. So you just got to get a number in front of it one day and you'll be okay. But that being said, Leadership Carroll, we're underway this year. We're about halfway done with this year's class. If anybody would like to attend, we still have openings. If you wait until like a month or two from now, we may not. So if you want to attend, please do. If you want to ask any questions about it, come and see me or probably 15 people. Or who's been through Leadership Carroll out there right now? So there's a lot of people that have been through it. Obviously, it's pretty decent. So thank you again to our sponsors. Brown, Schultz, Sheridan, and Fritz, certified public accountants and business advisors. So another one of those long names like Dennis Twigg. Can't you guys just do something simple? Thank you guys, though. You've been sponsoring this forever. And Main Street Advisors. That's a simple name. Thank you to both of you guys. Really appreciate it. There's a little card on everybody's table with the upcoming events. We have a certain luncheon next month. I think it's going to be March 19th at Springdale Prep School. And we're going to be hearing from a certain person named Brian DiLeonardo. You're still speaking, Brian, right? That's what I've been, well, we're telling you, you're going to speak, so that'd be great to go to. Dennis Twigg, thank you again for the hard work you do and for being the MC here. The Carroll Biz Challenge, if any of you guys know about that, it's a great event that we do at the Chamber for like local startup business. This is our 9th year, and we're taking applications right now through the end of May. Last year, we had 47 local entrepreneurs apply. We picked the top 5. They present at a live event. Our event this year is going to be August 27th at the Carroll Arts Center. Somebody walks away with $5,000 in cash and a lot of other stuff. So if you know anyone who's an entrepreneur, business that they are looking to start, or maybe they just did, please have them go to the actual website and apply, and it's free. Last but not least, the Chamber's having a great trip this year. We'd like to take a trip about every year. We're going to the Amalfi Coast of Italy. We've got flyers outside. And I don't know if I've forgotten anything, except we are going to be coming out with our next Connections magazine. So if you want to take an ad in that, you can talk to Donna B. Miller from Cone. Donna, where are you at? Donna's in the back. And last but not least, I do want to thank our friends from the Community Media Center. These guys are amazing. They set this up. They filmed this. They streamed it live. It'll be on Channel 19. They'll play it time and time again so you can watch it and you can just be rejuvenated by Ted's positive information. So thank you guys so much for being here with us today. Thanks.